Okay, so as you have seen, lists is a huge topic, and I don't think it's logically complex like loops, but it is very detailed, and I only scratched the surface. So let's have a look at a more complex program that we can create by combining all of the things that we've learned so far. So here I have a problem. You pretty much have a coffee shop where there's 6 employees, and you want to create a program where you input the number of hours everybody's worked, and the program adds up and calculates the total pay that you have to pay them. So I'll just walk through how I would solve this problem. First, we know that we have 6 employees. So I'll just create a constant. Number of employees is 6. Then each of these employees will have the number of hours that they've all worked. So this will be my array, or this will be my list. And you could initialize the number of hours something like this. So I have a list with 6 zeros in it. But what if you change the number of employees to like 7 or 8, right? Then you would have to go back into your code and add another a few zeros here. So another way that you can kind of initialize the number of hours is by creating a list of one element and then using the multiplication symbol and then number of employees. So this right here. So line number 12 here will just create an array of 6, and you can see it right here. Now for each employee we have to get how many hours they worked. So for index in range of num employees, we will input the number of hours worked by employee, and we want it to say employee 1, employee 2, employee 3. So I'll just say index, but our indices start at 0, so index plus 1. This will be a float, so I have to cast it to a float and then store the value in a variable, except the variable that I'm storing it is in a list, right? So my for loop here, or my range, it creates a list of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Index takes on the values of all of these numbers, and so the input will be stored into the list here at a specific index. And so when that's finished, then we want to ask the user to input the hourly pay, but we want this to be outside of our loop, and that will also be a float. And so now what we have to do is just print the number of dollars that each employee has earned. So I will just print employee index plus 1 has earned some gross pay, which I'll have to calculate, and I want 2 decimal points. Okay, and so how do I calculate gross pay? Well, gross pay is just the hours worked times by the pay, or the pay rate. So if I run this now, and I put values in, then we get the amount of dollars they all earned. And let's also keep track of the total that the owner has to pay for all these workers. And so in that case, we just have to create a variable here called total. It is going to be 0. And then while we're going through this loop, our total is going to increase by the gross pay. And then at the very end, we can just print the total pay for all employees is however many dollars. So if I run this again, I put values in, then I get the total pay for all 6 employees as well. Now, your job for the extension here is to expand to account for the overtime pay. If the employee worked more than 40 hours in a week, then they should get time and a half for the extra amount that they worked. So if they worked 60 hours in a week, they'll get 40 hours regular and then time and a half on the extra 20 hours overtime. Let's also look at how we can pass a list into a function. So I will erase all this and I'll create a function. So the function I'll be creating is to just add up all the values in the list. So I'm going to call it SumList. Then here inside of my function, I'll just create a variable called total. At the beginning, total is going to be 0. And then for each item in my list that I will pass to it, we'll increase the total by the item. But what is the list that I pass to it? Well, I have to create a variable right here, right? So I'm just creating a variable called list because my function is going to take a list in it, and then I can actually loop through that list afterwards. Oh, and I think list is a reserved name, so I'll just say list with an extra t, just so it's not green. And then when this function finishes, then I will just return the total. And so now I can just test my function if I input a list of these numbers, but I of course have to print the value, then we should get the right answer. And we get 55, which I think is right. So that's how you can pass a list into a function. You can also return a list out of a function. So here I'll just create a new function called first n numbers, right? So the first however many numbers, that is going to take a number in. So if you put 5 into this function, it's going to print 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for example. It's kind of like the range, but it will actually include the last number. And here we will just say for I in range of num, but I'll have to do num plus 1 because range only works from 0 up to number, but not including the number. And here I will have to append my list, right? So I guess first I have to create my list here. So I'll just say li is empty, and then here I'll just say li dot append, and I'm going to append I. Then after the loop, I can just return li. And so here, if I just print this function with, let's just say the number 5, then we should get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that is what we get. Okay, for the last part of this video, I'll just talk about the 2D lists. So last time we had something like this and we joined the lists together with the plus symbol. But I mentioned that rather than having the list look something like this, where all the student numbers and the names are in one column, it's preferred to have the list look something like this, where in one column you have all the names and in the other column you have the student numbers, right? And obviously you can do more than just this. And so in this case, what you have to do is you have to create a two-dimensional array. And so the way I like to create this is row by row. So if I look at Alex and student number 1, then what I can do here is I'll create a new variable called students, and it will also be a list, but now it's a two-dimensional list. So within my list, within these square brackets, I will open up another pair of square brackets. And inside of this square bracket, I will have Alex and 1. Right, so Alex and 1, that's its own list. The first entry is Alex, the second entry is 1. So here I will say Alex, then comma 1, because these are two items in my inner list. So that's my first row. But now for my second row, I will have Bob and 2. So that's my first list done. And my second list will have a comma, and then Bob, and then 2. And you can keep going and declare all of them. And you will end up with something like this. So our one big list contains 5 little lists. Okay, and for organization purposes, you can put enters here, just so you can kind of see that the first column is the names and the second column is the student numbers. And so it looks very similar to our Excel sheet right here. So again, in Excel, this is kind of how it looks like, and this is what we write in Python. Now let's explore this. So we can print students, and we just get a two-dimensional list. Okay, and if I just print square brackets 0, then I will get Alex and 1. So I will get the inner list. And now if I want to print the name Alex, right, so just Alex, then I'm going to be printing this list. So this entry here is Alex, comma 1. So if I want to access Alex now, I have to put another square bracket in here and another 0. So now I should just get Alex. So the first number prints the row, which row I want, and the second number prints the column. So if I want, you can put 0 and 1, and that's going to print Alex's student number. So if I have to loop through this, so for I in range of the length of students, and if I just print all the i's, this length of students is only going to return the number of rows there are. So it's going to return 5. So that's what I get. If I want to know the number of columns, then I would have to say for length of students, then square brackets, and I can put in whichever entry I want, right? So if I want the 0th, then this will just give me 2, right? So it gave me 2, but it's still just printing the rows because I'm asking it to print the rows. So this thing prints the rows. If I want to print just the name of the row, then I'll just put another bracket in here and put a 0. So I just get all the names. If I want the student numbers, I just put 1 instead of 0 because it's my column 1. I get my student numbers. Okay, so now if I want to print the names and the student numbers, then I have to nest something. So inside of my row by row loop, so once I access a row, then I want to print a column. So it's going to go inside of this loop. So I'll say for j in range of length of students, but this length of students will return how many rows I have. I want to know how many columns I have. So it's going to be of students I, right? Because the first time it goes through this, length of students I is going to check for the length of this row. Then the second time it's going to check for the length of this row, length of this row, length of this row, and then length of the final row. And now for printing, I will say print student I and j. So students ij here. And if I print this, it's going to print it, but everything is on a new line. So let me just add an end thing here. So when it prints student's name and then the student number, I don't want it to be on a separate line. So if I print this now, everything's going to be on the same line, which is, I don't know if that's better or worse, but you know, it's something. And so if I want to have now every name on a different line, then outside of my inner loop, I have to just print a new line. So here I get Alex 1, Bob 2, Cletus 3, Dan 4, Ed 5. So that's all of the examples that you need for a 2D list. It doesn't get more complicated than this. I mean, you could create a 3D list, right? So inside of this list, you could have another list. But the logic is all here. The problem is navigating to the lists, mostly because of the nested loops. That is what's going to be hard in this chapter. So yeah, that's it for this video.